The world had already accepted that the Lycan King would never awaken again. Then, in the middle of the frozen forest, an Omega girl whispered 3 words that changed the fate of an entire kingdom. Please come back. The storm over Silverpine Forest had covered every path with snow, and the cold wind carried silence through the ancient trees. Amelia Rose Carter never expected to find anything beyond the healing herbs she searched for that night. She was only a 24-year-old Omega healer living far from the royal cities, someone most people ignored because they believed Omegas belonged in the background. But Amelia had never measured her worth by what others believed. She knew the value of helping someone who needed her. That was why she stopped when she found a mysterious man lying beneath the snow-covered branches. His clothing was unlike anything ordinary travelers wore. The dark fabric carried the symbol of the Lycan royal family, though Amelia did not recognize it at first. To her, he was not a king. He was simply someone who needed help. The man before her was King Alexander Blackwood, the most powerful Lycan ruler in the world. His name was known across every territory. His strength was respected. His presence was feared. But now, hidden beneath the quiet forest sky, he was no longer surrounded by guards, advisors, or the walls of his palace. Amelia looked around the empty forest and realized there was no one else coming. No one else would find him in time. She knew helping him could bring attention she never wanted. She knew getting involved with someone connected to the royal world could change her simple life forever. But Amelia had never been someone who walked away when another person needed kindness. She carefully used her healing abilities, focusing all her energy on bringing comfort and stability to the stranger. Yet something felt different. The moment her hand reached for his, Amelia felt a strange warmth unlike anything she had experienced before. It was as if some invisible connection had recognized them both. Confused but determined, she continued. The hours passed quietly in the forest. Amelia stayed beside him, refusing to leave someone. Alone in the freezing night. She did not know his title. She did not know the secrets surrounding him. She only knew that every life mattered. When his condition became more difficult, Amelia made a choice that no ordinary healer would have dared to make. She used the rarest gift passed through her family line, a final healing bond known only in forgotten stories. The kiss of life. Legend said it could only awaken someone when there was a connection strong enough to reach beyond ordinary healing. Amelia never believed such legends were real. But as she closed her eyes and offered the last of her strength, the impossible happened. The silent forest changed. The cold air seemed to pause. The man who had been lost between life and dreams suddenly opened his eyes. Silver light reflected in his gaze as he looked at the Omega healer who had saved him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Alexander Blackwood, the Lycan King, stared at the woman beside him with disbelief. He had faced countless challenges throughout his reign, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The first word that escaped his lips was not a question. It was not a command. It was a single powerful word filled with recognition. Mine. Amelia froze, unaware that the simple act of saving a stranger had awakened a destiny written long before she was born. And far away, inside the royal palace, an entire kingdom was about to discover that the person who saved their king was the one person they never expected. The first thing Amelia Rose Carter noticed was not the power in his voice. It was the confusion in his eyes. The stranger she had saved looked at her as if he was searching for an answer hidden somewhere beyond the quiet forest. Amelia stepped back slightly, still unable to understand what had just happened. The man who had seemed lost only moments before now carried a presence unlike anyone she had ever met. The cold air around them felt different, almost as if the entire forest was waiting for the next moment. Mine, he had said. The single word continued to echo in Amelia's thoughts. She did not understand its meaning, and she certainly did not understand why the stranger looked at her with such recognition. To Amelia, he was only a person she had helped. She had not saved him because of his status. She had not expected gratitude or a reward. She had simply done what her heart told her was right. Are you able to stand? Amelia asked softly. The man slowly moved, still trying to understand the situation. His memories were returning piece by piece. The forest. The storm. The moment when his strength faded. Then the warmth that brought him back. And finally, the face of the Omega healer who refused to leave him behind. Alexander Blackwood had spent his entire life surrounded by power. As the Lycan King, he had armies, advisors, and countless people who followed his commands. But none of those things mattered in that moment. The person who reached him when no one else could was a young Omega who did not even know his name. Alexander looked at her carefully. "Who are you?" he asked. Amelia hesitated before answering. "Amelia Carter. I am a healer from the nearby village." The answer surprised him. A healer. An Omega. Someone the royal world would never expect to hold such importance. Alexander knew the ancient legends of the Lycan bloodline. He knew stories about rare bonds that appeared only once in a lifetime, but he had never believed those stories would become his reality. Amelia noticed the way he looked at her and became uncomfortable. She had spent years being judged because of what she was. She did not want another person, especially someone mysterious and powerful, to decide her value based on a title. "You do not need to repay me," she said gently. "Anyone would have helped." Alexander looked at her with surprise. Most people who discovered his identity would have asked for something. They would have wanted protection, wealth, or a place near the royal family. Amelia wanted none of that. She only wanted to make sure he was safe. Before Alexander could answer, distant sounds from the forest reached them. The royal search party was finally approaching. Amelia realized the stranger was not an ordinary traveler. The symbols on his clothing, the way others called his name, and the respect in their voices revealed the truth. The man she had saved was not just someone important. He was the Lycan King himself. Amelia froze for a moment. She had placed her hands on the person who ruled the entire kingdom. She had spoken to him as an equal. She had saved his life without knowing who he was. Alexander watched her expression change and expected fear or uncertainty. Instead, Amelia simply lowered her head respectfully. "I hope you are feeling better, Your Majesty." Her words were polite, but they carried the same calm kindness she had shown from the beginning. For the first time in years, Alexander felt something rare. He felt seen not as a king, not as a ruler, but as a person. And as the royal guards arrived to take him home, Alexander knew one thing with complete certainty. The Omega healer who saved him was not someone he could simply forget. The news of the Lycan King's return spread across Mooncrest Kingdom faster than anyone expected. For days, the royal palace had been filled with uncertainty. Advisors whispered about the mysterious healer who had been beside their king when he awakened. Guards shared stories about the Omega woman who remained calm in the presence of the most powerful ruler in the land. But while the palace searched for answers, Amelia Rose Carter returned to her quiet life in Silverpine Village. She did not expect anyone to remember her. She did not expect a reward. She simply returned to gathering herbs, preparing remedies, and helping the people who had always depended on her. To Amelia, the night in the forest was something she had already accepted as part of her journey. She had helped someone in need, and that was enough. But in the royal palace, King Alexander Blackwood could not move forward so easily. The Lycan King had faced countless responsibilities throughout his reign, but nothing had affected him the way Amelia had. He remembered the moment she looked at him without fear. He remembered how she treated him like an ordinary person instead of a powerful ruler. Most importantly, he remembered that she saved him without knowing who he was. Alexander had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Many approached him because of his title, his influence, or the power connected to his position. Amelia had done the opposite. She had given him everything she had and asked for nothing in return. That realization stayed with him. When the royal advisors gathered to discuss the incident, many were curious about Amelia's identity. Some questioned how an Omega healer could create such an extraordinary result. They searched through old records and discovered stories about rare healing abilities that had nearly disappeared from history. Alexander listened carefully but remained focused on one thought. Amelia was not important because of what she could do. She was important because of who she was. Meanwhile, Amelia continued facing the reality of her own world. In Silverpine Village, Omegas were often overlooked. Many people believed they were meant to follow rather than lead. Amelia had heard those opinions throughout her life, but she never allowed them to define her. She knew kindness was not weakness. She knew patience was not a lack of courage. Every person she helped reminded her that value came from actions, not from how society ranks someone. One afternoon, a royal messenger arrived at the village. Amelia immediately knew something had changed. The messenger delivered a request from the palace. The Lycan King wished to speak with her again. Amelia looked at the message quietly. Part of her wondered why someone as powerful as Alexander would want to meet with a simple healer. She had no interest in royal attention, and she did not want her life to become complicated. Still, she remembered the stranger from the forest. She remembered the person who needed help before he became a king again. After some thought, Amelia agreed to return to Mooncrest Palace. She did not go because she wanted a place beside the throne. She did not go because she expected anything from Alexander. She went because she believed every person deserved honesty and understanding. When Amelia finally entered the palace once more, Alexander was waiting. The distance between them was different now. He was still the Lycan King and she was still an Omega healer. But something had changed. Alexander no longer saw her as someone who had simply saved his life. He saw the person who reminded him that even a king could need kindness. And Amelia slowly realized that the mysterious stranger from the forest was not the only one whose life had changed that night. Her own destiny had begun moving towards something she never expected. The grand halls of Mooncrest Palace had welcomed countless nobles, warriors, and leaders throughout history, but never had they witnessed someone like Amelia Rose Carter. As she walked through the towering entrance, she felt every pair of eyes following her. The Omega healer from Silverpine Village had entered a world built around power, tradition, and status. Yet Amelia carried herself with the same quiet confidence she had shown beneath the frozen trees. She was not there to impress anyone. She was not there to claim a place beside the throne. She was simply there because the Lycan King had asked to speak with her. King Alexander Blackwood watched her approach from the royal chamber. He noticed something that surprised him. Amelia did not look at the throne first. She did not look at the symbols of wealth surrounding him. She looked directly at him, the same way she had when he was only a stranger needing help. That moment reminded Alexander of something he had forgotten. Before he was a king, he was still a person. "You came," Alexander said. Amelia gave a small nod. "You needed answers. I wanted to make sure you had them." Her simple response caught him off guard. Most people who entered the royal palace carefully chose every word, hoping to gain something from the person standing before them. Amelia spoke with honesty instead of ambition. As they talked, Alexander learned more about the woman who had changed his fate. He discovered that Amelia had spent years helping villagers who had no way to repay her. She treated every person with the same patience, whether they were wealthy or forgotten by society. She never asked for recognition. She never expected anyone to notice. Alexander began to understand why the legends surrounding rare healers were never truly about their abilities. The greatest gift was not the power itself. It was the heart of the person who carried. However, not everyone in the palace shared his thoughts. When the royal council learned that Amelia had been invited back, questions began spreading through the kingdom. Some nobles believed an Omega should never stand near the Lycan throne. They did not know Amelia. They only saw the title attached to her. They judged her before hearing her story. During a formal gathering, Amelia felt the weight of their attention. She could sense the doubts surrounding her, but she refused to let those opinions change who she was. Alexander noticed her calm expression and remembered the night in the forest. She had faced uncertainty then too. She had stood beside someone far more powerful than herself and still acted with compassion. That was the strength he respected most. "She saved my life when she did not know my name," Alexander told the council. "Her value was clear before any of you learned who I was." The room became silent. Amelia looked at him with surprise. She had not asked him to defend her. She had not expected the king to understand what it felt like to be judged. But in that moment, she saw a change in Alexander. The man who once carried only the weight of a crown was beginning to see beyond it. After the gathering ended, Amelia stood near the palace gardens, looking across the kingdom she had never imagined entering. Alexander joined her quietly. For a moment there was no king and no Omega. There were only two people who had crossed paths on a cold night and found something neither of them expected. A connection that was only beginning to reveal its true meaning. The days following Amelia Rose Carter's arrival at Mooncrest Palace brought changes that no one expected. The Omega healer who had once lived quietly among the forests of Silverpine was now at the center of the royal court's attention. Yet despite the whispers surrounding her, Amelia remained the same person she had always been. Every morning, she walked through the palace gardens, studying rare plants and offering her healing knowledge to anyone who needed it. She did not see herself as someone important. She simply believed that every life deserved care. King Alexander Blackwood noticed this more than anyone. He had watched countless people enter his palace with hidden intentions. Some wanted influence. Some wanted recognition. Some wanted the power that came with standing beside a king. But Amelia was different. She never changed her behavior because of his title. She spoke to him with the same honesty she had shown in the forest. That truth stayed with him. One evening, Alexander invited Amelia to the ancient library of Mooncrest Palace. The room held centuries of royal records, forgotten legends, and stories passed down through generations. He wanted to understand what had happened that night in Silverpine Forest. "There is something about the healing you used," Alexander said as he opened an old book. "Something that has not happened for many years." Amelia looked at the pages filled with symbols and writings from the past. She had heard stories about rare healing gifts before, but she never believed they were connected to her. The ancient records described a bond that appeared only during moments of true selfless action, a connection that could awaken when someone gave everything without expecting anything in return. Amelia quietly looked away. She had never considered herself special. For most of her life, she had been reminded that Omegas were often overlooked. She knew what it felt like to be underestimated. She knew what it felt like when people saw her role before they saw her heart. Alexander noticed her expression change. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" he asked. Amelia remained silent. "I do not see someone who saved me because of a legend. I see someone who saved me because kindness was more important than fear." His words surprised her. She had spent years accepting that others might never understand her choices. Hearing the Lycan King acknowledge her for who she truly was felt different. But outside the library walls, not everyone accepted this change. Some members of the court continued searching for reasons to doubt Amelia. They believed the connection between an Omega healer and the Lycan King was impossible. They believed tradition was stronger than any new truth. Alexander understood the resistance, but for the first time in his reign, he questioned whether tradition was always the same as what was right. He remembered the night he opened his eyes in the forest. Before knowing her name, before knowing her position, he felt the sincerity of her heart. That memory mattered more than any royal opinion. Meanwhile, Amelia began to realize something about Alexander as well. Behind the crown, behind the expectations of an entire kingdom, there was a man who carried responsibilities he rarely shared with anyone. The more they spoke, the more they understood each other. Their connection was no longer only about the mysterious event that brought them together. It was becoming something deeper, built through trust and respect. And while the kingdom searched for answers about the Omega who awakened their king, Alexander and Amelia were beginning to discover the truth themselves. The rarest bond was not created by power. It was created by two people who chose to see each other clearly. The morning light touched the halls of Mooncrest Palace, but the atmosphere inside the royal court had become heavier than ever. The return of the Lycan King had brought celebration throughout the kingdom, yet the presence of Amelia Rose Carter continued to challenge the beliefs many had carried for generations. An Omega healer standing beside the throne was something the court had never expected. Some saw her kindness as a weakness. Some believed her connection with King Alexander Blackwood was only a mystery waiting to be explained. But Alexander saw something different. He saw the person who stayed beside him when no one else knew where he was. He saw the woman who offered compassion before knowing his name. During a meeting with the royal council, questions about Amelia became impossible to ignore. The advisors spoke carefully, but their doubts were clear. They wondered why the king trusted someone from outside the royal world. They wondered why an Omega with no noble background had become important to the future of the kingdom. Alexander listened quietly until every voice had been heard. Then he stood and looked across the chamber. "You are asking why I trust her," he said. "But you should. Ask why you failed to see her value before I did." The room became silent. Alexander continued, explaining that Amelia had never asked for recognition, power, or a place within the royal family. She had helped him when he was simply someone who needed help. She had shown courage without expecting anything in return. For the first time, many members of the court began to understand that Amelia's greatest strength was not a rare healing ability. It was the heart behind that gift. Later that day, Amelia walked through the palace gardens, reflecting on everything that had happened. She never imagined her quiet life in Silverpine Village would lead her here. She had spent years believing that staying unnoticed was the safest path. Now, people across the kingdom knew her name. Yet she still wondered if she truly belonged in a place surrounded by power and tradition. Alexander found her among the flowers and noticed the uncertainty in her expression. "You are wondering if you belong here," he said. Amelia looked at him with surprise. She had not expected him to understand. "This world was not created for people like me," she admitted softly. Alexander looked toward the palace walls. Perhaps the world was wrong then. His answer stayed with her. The Lycan King was beginning to change, but Amelia was changing too. She was learning that being recognized did not mean losing who she was. She could remain the same person who helped strangers in a small village, while still having a place in a greater story. As the days passed, Alexander and Amelia spent more time together. Their conversations moved beyond the mystery of their connection. They talked about dreams, fears, and the responsibilities they both carried. Alexander discovered that Amelia's gentleness came from strength, not weakness. Amelia discovered that behind the crown was a man who wanted to lead with understanding instead of distance. The bond between them continued to grow, but neither of them rushed to define it. They allowed trust to come first. They allowed respect to become the foundation. And somewhere within Mooncrest Kingdom, a quiet transformation had begun. The court had once asked why an Omega mattered. Soon, they would discover that the person they underestimated was the one who had the power to inspire an entire kingdom. The days following Alexander Blackwood's decision before the Royal Council brought a quiet change to Mooncrest Kingdom. The whispers had not disappeared completely, but something important had shifted. For the first time, many people began looking beyond Amelia Rose Carter's title as an Omega and started noticing the person behind it. Amelia never tried to prove herself through speeches or demands. Instead, she continued doing what she had always done. She listened. She helped. She cared. Within the palace walls, she began offering her healing knowledge to those who needed guidance. From young apprentices learning old remedies to villagers who traveled long distances seeking help. Every action showed the same kindness that had awakened the Lycan King in the frozen forest. Alexander watched these moments quietly. He had ruled for years, making decisions that affected thousands of lives, but Amelia showed him a different kind of leadership. She reminded him that a kingdom was not built only through strength and tradition. It was built through understanding the people who depended on it. One afternoon, Alexander invited Amelia to visit the lower villages surrounding Mooncrest. He wanted her to see that her actions had already created change. As they traveled through the countryside, Amelia noticed something unexpected. People who once looked away when they saw an Omega now approached her with respect. They thanked her for the care she had given them. They spoke about how her compassion had inspired others to help one another. Amelia felt overwhelmed. She had never believed her simple choices could reach so many people. "I did not do anything extraordinary," she told Alexander. He looked at her with a quiet smile. "That is exactly why it matters. You never helped people because you wanted to be remembered." His words stayed with her. Alexander understood something that many others had missed. Amelia's power was not only in her healing gift. It was in the way she made people feel valued. However, not everyone accepted the changes happening in the kingdom. Some members of the old royal families feared that traditions were disappearing. They believed the connection between the Lycan King and an Omega healer represented a future they did not understand. Amelia noticed the tension, but she refused to let it change her. She had spent her entire life facing judgment. She knew that responding with anger would only create more distance. Instead, she continued showing the same patience that had guided her from the beginning. Alexander admired that more than anything. He had spent years believing that a ruler needed to appear untouchable. Amelia showed him that true influence came from being genuine. One evening, They stood together on a balcony overlooking Mooncrest Kingdom. The lights of the villages shined below, creating a peaceful view across the land. "When I first met you, I thought you were someone who needed protection," Alexander said. Amelia looked at him curiously. "And now?" He looked toward the kingdom they shared. "Now I understand that you were the one who changed everything." Amelia remained quiet, feeling the weight of those words. She had entered Alexander's life by accident, but the connection between them had become something neither of them could ignore. It was no longer only about the mysterious bond that brought them together. It was about trust, respect, and the choice to see each other clearly. And as the kingdom slowly opened its heart to the Omega healer who saved their king, a new chapter began for everyone in Mooncrest. The bond between Amelia Rose Carter and King Alexander Blackwood continued to grow, but neither of them wanted their connection to be defined only by the mysterious event that brought them together. They had discovered something far more meaningful than an ancient legend. They had discovered trust. In the past, Alexander had always believed that duty came before everything else. As the Lycan King, he carried the expectations of an entire kingdom on his shoulders. Every decision had consequences. Every emotion had to remain controlled. But Amelia saw the person behind the crown. She saw the quiet moments when he questioned himself. She saw the responsibility he carried without complaint. And for Alexander, that was something he had never experienced before. One evening, as the first signs of spring reached Mooncrest Kingdom, Alexander and Amelia walked through the royal gardens. The snow that once covered the paths had melted, revealing new flowers beneath the frozen ground. It reminded Amelia of something she had always believed. Even after the harshest seasons, life could begin again. "You changed this kingdom without trying to rule it," Alexander said as they walked. Amelia looked at him with curiosity. "I only helped where I could." Alexander smiled softly. "That is exactly what makes it powerful." Amelia lowered her gaze, remembering the years when she was told that being an Omega meant she would always stand behind others. She remembered the moments when people judged her before knowing her heart. But now, standing beside the Lycan King, she realized something important. Her worth had never depended on whether others recognized it. It had always existed. Meanwhile, Alexander faced his own transformation. The kingdom still saw him as a powerful ruler, but Amelia had shown him that leadership was not only about making decisions from a throne. It was about understanding the people affected by those decisions. He began changing old traditions that had caused many Omegas to feel unseen. He listened more carefully. He welcomed different voices. He built a kingdom where respect mattered more than status. The changes were not immediate, but they were real. One day, Amelia found Alexander in the palace library, studying old records about Lycan history. She noticed the same books that once represented duty and tradition now contained notes about compassion, unity, and the future. "You are changing the stories," Amelia said. Alexander looked up. "No, I am finally seeing the parts of the story that were always there." His answer touched her. They both understood that their journey had never been about a king saving an Omega or an Omega saving a king. It was about two people who had learned from each other. Their connection was not built on power. It was built on choices. As time passed, the kingdom slowly accepted the truth. Amelia was not important because she stood near the throne. She was important because she had reminded everyone that kindness could be a form of strength. Alexander was not respected because he was the strongest ruler. He was respected because he chose to become a better one. Together, they represented a new beginning for Mooncrest Kingdom, a future where an Omega's voice could be heard, where a king could lead with compassion, and where destiny was not something that controlled their lives, but something they chose to embrace. Yet even as peace settled across the kingdom, one final moment awaited them. The world had learned about the bond that awakened the Lycan King. Soon, it would discover the true meaning behind the connection that had changed them both. The morning sun rose over Mooncrest Kingdom, shining across the palace that had witnessed a transformation no one could have imagined. The halls that once carried whispers of doubt now carried stories of hope. The people who once questioned the place of an Omega beside the Lycan throne now understood the truth. Amelia Rose Carter had never changed because of a crown. She had never needed power to prove her worth. She had simply remained the same person who walked through a frozen forest, and chose kindness when the world expected her to walk away. Years of tradition had taught the kingdom to measure strength through status, authority, and influence. But Amelia showed them another kind of strength. The strength to care. The strength to believe every person mattered. The strength to remain gentle, even when others refused to understand her. King Alexander Blackwood stood beside her during the spring celebration of Mooncrest Kingdom. The entire realm gathered before the palace, watching the ruler who had returned from the edge of uncertainty, and the Omega healer who had changed the course of history. But Alexander knew the truth. Amelia was never important because she saved a king. She was important because she reminded him what being a true leader meant. Before Amelia entered his life, Alexander believed a king had to stand above everyone else. He believed distance created respect and that responsibility required him to hide every part of himself. But Amelia showed him that a ruler could be powerful and still be compassionate. A leader could listen without becoming weak. A king could care without losing authority. When I first opened my eyes in the forest, I thought I had been given another chance to continue ruling, Alexander said quietly as they looked over the kingdom. But now I understand I was given another chance to become someone better. Amelia smiled softly. She remembered the lonely life she once lived in Silverpine Village. She remembered being judged before anyone knew her story. She remembered believing that staying unnoticed was the safest choice. But destiny had led her somewhere she never expected. Not because she searched for greatness, but because she continued choosing kindness. The bond that connected Amelia and Alexander was no longer a mystery that people whispered about. It was no longer only a forgotten legend or an impossible event from a winter night. It had become a symbol of change throughout the kingdom. A reminder that the person others overlook may hold the answer everyone needs. The royal court changed. The people changed. Even the way the kingdom viewed Omegas changed. And at the center of it all were two people who had found each other when neither expected it. An Omega healer who saw a person instead of a title. A Lycan King who learned that true power came from understanding, not control. Their story was never about one person saving another. It was about two souls who helped each other discover who they were meant to become. As the celebration continued beneath the warm spring sky, Alexander looked at Amelia and knew one thing with certainty. The greatest treasure of his kingdom was never hidden inside the royal vaults. It was the person who taught him that even the strongest heart can be healed by compassion. And from that day forward, Mooncrest Kingdom would remember the legend of the Omega who saved their king and the king who finally learned the meaning of true strength.